and she is an English and Publishing major, and she's from Omaha, Nebraska. So let's welcome her here.
Thank you all for coming out tonight. I hope you're in the right spot. This is Publishing Across the Pond. And if you're not, at least you get to look at beautiful pictures of Ireland, so you can't really lose. But we're going to go ahead and get started, even though if we were to do this in the actual spirit of Ireland, we would wait another 15 to 20 minutes just to chat, get to know each other, have some cookies, some coffee, lemonade, just kind of mellow out, because if there's one thing you learn when you're in Ireland, it's that life is just meant to be enjoyed. So you don't have to stick to your strict schedules of 7:45 on the dot. But since we're in America and we're all rush, we'll go ahead and get started. But just relax, enjoy yourselves, and let's learn about Ireland. So I had the wonderful opportunity to go to Lahinch, County Clare, and I stayed with 5 other young women who were all doing research projects or internships. So I had a 2-week internship with Salmon Poetry, which is actually located in Ennis-Steinman, which is about 2 miles down the road from Lahinch, where we lived. And so I was able to walk every day to and from work, which was awesome. Normally it's rainy and always raining and gloomy in Ireland, which the locals kept telling us. This was really exceptional that it had only rained maybe 2 days while we were there. So they thanked us for bringing nice weather, which I think is the first time I have ever been thanked for bringing nice weather. So that was a nice compliment. But otherwise, I could have taken the bus Éireann up there. And this right here is a picture of where I worked. So that's on Parliament Street in Ennis-Steinman. And this is Salmon Bookshop and Literary Center, where Salmon Poetry is based. And so the first floor there is a bookshop, like any other bookshop you might think of or expect. And it has everything from Salmon's productions to every book under the moon that the editor has collected over the years and has been donated, or someone thought it was cool and just left it in the shop to be sold. But it has everything from Irish history to photography to learning how to draw. So you can find some fun little treasures in there if you wander through long enough. And then the second floor is where the editor has her office. And so a lot of backlog files and extra books are all up there, as well as where we do a lot of the editing and shipping and things like that. And then there are also a couple of different rooms up there, as well as a bathroom and a kitchen. So when poets or authors come to stay in Ennis-Steinman, they can stay there as opposed to needing to get a hotel room or anything like that, which is really nice. And then on the third floor, which you can't see, it's cut off in the picture, is the conference room. So it's a cute little conference room with a great view. It's got a nice long table and a podium, which is where the editor has either conferences over the process of where our particular book is, if she's meeting with an author, or she also hosts poetry workshops and things like that in the conference room. So also very nice space to have. So that's a little bit about Salmon itself. It does specialize in poetry, however, it does also do prose and a little bit of nonfiction as well. So this is Jessie Lendennie. This is a picture of her at a writing conference, actually last year, for Association of Writers and Writing Programs. So she's both a poet and the editor. So as a poet, that makes her a great candidate for the editing position, as she knows what makes good poetry, what doesn't, and kind of how to help authors improve upon their editing or their pieces as they're editing and workshopping them. So she's super nice and loves dogs. She has 4 giant German Shepherd little sheepdogs that would wander through the bookshop on their own, so that was kind of fun. So the actual business of publishing. Publishing is like many other small businesses when you're going at it from a small press standpoint. So first of all, you kind of want to find your niche. So in Salmon Poetry's case, that is poetry. I asked Jessie what she looked for most when she was contracting authors, and she said women had the priority. So first and foremost, she liked to publish women's poetry, prose, nonfiction, and then Irish, and then British, and then she would also publish American. But she felt that female Irish poets and authors were especially important because they're perhaps the most underrepresented. As Salmon Poetry is one of the few Irish presses that there are, she wants to especially prioritize that. Contracting is the next big step. So Jessie went over this a little bit with me. She showed me an example contract that she had that she uses with her authors. But essentially, it's getting down the basics in a legal form so that if someone should come back later with some sort of legal issue, it's all right there. So you will have everything established from when the release date will be, to how many pages, to what sort of launch parties or promotional things the press is responsible for versus what the author's responsible for. And that, again, that just simplifies things if some sort of legal question should come up later or if royalties should come up. Scheduling is vital for any business, but especially with presses, as you have so many different steps that each publication has to go through in order to be successful. So you have to schedule everything from when the author needs to have the manuscript to the editor, to when the editor needs to have looked over those edits and sent them back to the author for their approval, and this back and forth before you have the final layout. And then you, of course, have to have the release date set in stone so that if you're having a launch party, if you are doing certain promotional events, you have those laid out ahead of time so that they can be properly publicized. And then you get into the actual production process. So again, that includes the manuscript writing and being sent to the editor, which when I was with Salmon, I actually, on the last day, got to help edit the front matter of Even the Daybreak, which is this one right here. And as you can see, it's a pretty sizable publication. So I got to go through and double check the table of contents and make sure that each author's name was spelled correctly and matched the title of the piece and that the pagination was correct. And so that was kind of a process because there are about 400 pages or so in this book. So editing is, again, a vital part of the process, and I experienced that as I was interning for Salmon Poetry. And then next in the process, after you're editing, you go through the design work, which all of the designs for the covers that you can see both here and all along here are all done by Siobhan, who works for Jessie, and she does both the layout of the words themselves, and which is the typesetting, and she also designs all of the covers, which this one's one of my favorites, Thanks for Nothing Hippies by Sarah Clancy. And yeah, I love the title too, it's pretty great. But I love this design in particular because of the kind of Mexican Day of the Dead feel in the skulls. It's very colorful, your eye automatically goes to it. So if you were to be perusing any sort of bookshop, this is automatically going to draw your eye, which is, of course, what you're looking for as an author and you're trying to sell your books. So that's why this one in particular is one of my favorites from a design standpoint. And then, of course, your production culminates in the actual printing and binding, and then you get to ship them all. So Salmon Poetry is an international press, so they ship all over the world. And I, again, got to do the fun task of packaging while I was interning for Jessie at Salmon. So, I mean, it's exactly what you thought it would be. I was putting books in envelopes and writing addresses on them, getting them ready to be shipped. Many of them in America, but also all over England and Europe. So it seemed really simple and unglamorous, but that was Jessie's point, was that not all of publishing is glamorous and fun, like designing pretty covers of different books. You also have to do the grunt work, which is just stuffing books into envelopes and getting them ready to ship. So not as exciting, but just as important, and she reiterated that when she said, you know, I just didn't have time for that, so I really appreciate it that you did it, which didn't make me feel so much better, but I mean, at least I was in Ireland doing it, not here, so. I was expecting all of these first pieces when I went over to Ireland, and that was my main goal, was to understand the small business side of things when running a press. But what I didn't expect was the promotion aspect about it. Jessie spent a lot of time explaining this to me because I went into it only really knowing how Hastings College Press published and promoted their material. So I kind of expected going to conferences and that kind of thing. And I expected Salmon Poetry, which was an international organization, to do more of the bigger launches like I thought of Penguin or some of the bigger presses doing. So it really surprised me when she said that most of it is author promotion. You have to be willing to go out there and to sell your book yourself. So sometimes a book will have an official launch and sometimes it won't. It kind of depends on how much the author wants to do and how much Jessie is able to do at that point. She publishes many, many books each year, so she can't afford, both financially and time-wise, to do a huge launch for every single book that she publishes. So, for instance, one of the ways she has gotten around that is to have one launch party for, say, 3 or 4 different books that are coming out at a certain time. So, which I thought was a brilliant solution, in which case you're cutting down on your costs as far as actually throwing the launch, but you also get the opportunity to swap members of different reading groups, getting the chance to have look at different materials from different authors. So one author may attract a certain group of people, and then at that same launch, they'll be exposed to another author's body of work, which may be different, but yet also interesting to them. So then you sell both some of that book and some of the other book, and it's also beneficial to readers because they get to expand their horizons as well. So I thought that was a clever way of sort of solving that financial issue. And then she, of course, stressed how much today's world is centered around social media and how you should be promoting your work on Facebook, on Instagram, and Twitter, and all of that. And not only just pictures of your book or samples of your writing, but also the events that you're going to and the things that you're doing, whether it's a little reading in a small town, like we did the other night with our poetry event at the Lark, or if you are going to the conference, the AWP, a Writers and Writing Workshops Association convention. Both of those are different ways to self-promote and to bring more attention to your pieces and what you're doing. So again, I was expecting all of the first parts, kind of going into it, seeing what small presses were all about. But the promotion one is the one that really struck me as something new and something that I had no idea was a part of publishing aspect. And it's one that I then used most when I came to apply what I'd learned from my Irish Fellows internship. So I actually wrote quite a bit of poetry while I was in Ireland, and then when I came back for my final project in my book design class, I made my own book of poetry, and I self-published it. And some of the pieces were workshopped by Jessie. She helped me. She actually sat down and went over my poetry with me, which was awesome. It was great to have someone that I would consider an expert in the field helping me through making my poetry better. And then I, again, took her advice and took what I had learned about self-promotion and took that to the Alpha Chi conference. So Alpha Chi is an interdisciplinary academic honorary, and we had a national conference, and I did a presentation on self-publishing and my creative writing and how storytelling can be done through the publishing process and design. And so I took that to the conference, and I was able to explain to people and kind of promote my book as I was going along. And then I had quite a few people come up to me and ask me to how they could get a copy of my book and how to buy my book, which was really cool. That was awesome for me. I didn't think that that interest was there. So just by self-promoting and sharing what I'd done, people shared their own experiences and their own interests with me, which was really cool. And then we had a poet laureate who was one of the presenters at the Alpha Chi conference, and I had the opportunity to speak with him after his presentation. And I was explaining to him about my project and about my book, and then I mentioned that I had been to Ireland and had worked with Salmon Poetry and Jessie Lendennie. And then he just laughed and he said, I published with Salmon Poetry, and so I know Jessie, and I know exactly what you're talking about. So that was really cool. And then afterwards, he told me that he was interested in having a copy of my book as well. So that was a really cool moment to have a poet laureate ask you for a copy of your book of poetry as an undergrad. Was definitely one of the highlights for me. So, and I wouldn't have had that connection without Jessie and without all of the things that she had taught me while I was over in Ireland. And so the first couple days of my internship were mostly organizing. I did a lot of shuffling of books from one room to another room to try to find shelving, somehow miraculously get more space in a bookshelf that's already overcrowded, and then to just putting books in envelopes and writing addresses. But then as the time went on and I learned more about how Jessie worked, what she looked for, I was able to learn more about how if I were an acquisitions editor, what I would look for as I'm going through samples of poetry. She showed me many of both rejected manuscripts and accepted manuscripts, and we even sat down and went over why this was a rejected manuscript and why this one was not. And so that was very helpful to me if I chose to go into acquisition editing, which is just another aspect of the publishing industry. And so I was able to go over that and have Jessie's input on my own poetry, and then all of that just kind of culminated into my final project, which I never would have even thought of doing if I hadn't had that experience with Jessie and that experience in Ireland. So I'm so grateful to both Jessie and everyone who was able to send me to Ireland, my Irish sponsor and the Irish Fellows Program, that I was able to eventually walk away with my own book that not only my peers want, but a poet laureate. So that was very cool. Now, if anyone has any questions that they might have over whether that's self-publishing or my internship in Ireland, anything like that? Yes.
You said an important piece that Jessie told you was kind of finding your niche, the Irish poetry. Did you kind of discover what your niche would be from like working at a press perspective, like which piece of the job would you like best? Or if your dream job is to run a press, what would be your niche that you want to publish?
Yeah, I definitely found out that my dream job is not to run a press. I was not as much a fan of the small business, running the business type aspect. I've done a lot of editing work with the HC Press, and so I think that's definitely my one true love is editing. But the acquisition editing section that Jessie had gone over with kind of how to workshop with authors and what should be rejected and what should be accepted, and that doesn't necessarily make it a bad piece, it's just not right for your theme or your specific interests, what your press is going for. So I think that acquisition editing is definitely something really interesting.
Yes? Curious, where was this? Like, you said the town, and I was like, where was that? Find out, doesn't know.
No, actually, it's on the far west coast of Ireland. Hinch was literally, we were right down the street from the beach. And then, I walked 2 miles inland to an assignment. So, yeah, we were right on the coast, far, far west. So it would be more what's considered more country. Whereas Dublin's like the hubbub center. So, far east coast. We were on the complete opposite end.
Where can we get your book?
Right now, I'm still trying to go through some more edits, and I hate the cover, so I'm trying to redesign that, but I'll let you know.
Who was the poet laureate that came?
Ed Morrow.
Okay.
Which he's a wonderful speaker and great poetry. I bought his book, so in case anyone's looking for a poet recommendation, he's a good one.
So Emily, I know that you prefer the editing side.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit why you prefer that rather than the production side, the typesetting side?
Sure. So typesetting is more, you're flowing the actual text into the software that you're using. With HC Press, we use Adobe InDesign. So that's all well and fine for me, but I would prefer checking for the stories, for the content, for the grammar, as opposed to making sure that all of your spacing is correct as far as Sometimes you have to shift design if you have a widow or orphan in the wrong place. And I just found out through my book design class that maybe design's not my strongest suit. I think my book was probably my greatest success in that I designed it so that it felt more like a conversation. So I tried to put my side of what I saw of Ireland on one side and then Ireland's what I perceived response on the other. And then my picture was in the middle. So that was kind of my greatest stroke of genius with design. But other than that, I just struggle with seeing how things should lay out with the page. Not that I can't, it's just, again, not the easiest thing, and I'm notorious for if something's not the easiest thing, it's not necessarily my favorite. So that would be why I tend to go more towards editing as opposed to design and layout.
So you're also one of the editors of Spectrum,
Yes.
student literary magazine here. Did your experience in Ireland shape in some way your ideas about how you might design like a literary magazine? And in what way?
Yeah, a little bit. I think with seeing Siobhan's cover designs were really inspirational just because I think in the past I'd always been afraid of using a cover that's too busy or using a picture or photograph that's too busy. I tend to go with more the simple. So, but seeing especially like the Mexican Day of the Dead one, there's so much to look at on that cover. So just not being afraid to play with the idea of using other strategies to make readers look where you want them to look in, typeface, bold or not bold, coloring. So I would say, yeah, probably more in the cover aspect of things with Spectrum.
You want to say something about the trend toward online reading versus publishing?
What my personal thoughts are? Sure, yeah. So it's pretty easy with the software that we use, especially with HC Press, the Adobe InDesign. You can easily turn into a print form or into a ebook, say, which I know a lot of the Hastings College Press books are both ebook and print book. Same in poetry is not so much the same way. They more stick to print. But I think that also depends on the author's preference. If the author wanted it to be specifically an ebook or print and ebook, then Jessie would make that available to them. But Salmon is mostly a print-based company. I personally love print. I'm a fan of being able to pick up my book and physically hold it as I'm reading it. So I'm not on the ebook bandwagon just yet. But for the most part, I believe Salmon is strict, which is kind of unusual for the time period.
Do you have any insight or input into the HC library design?
Does anyone have any other questions?